Hello, welcome to Africa is Home. My name is Jean-Paul. I'd like to apologize for my voice. I'm under the weather. Tonight we'll be talking to you about the economy and democracy in the continent. We have an amazing guest from New York City, Professor Milton. Professor is a prof of history, and here in the studio we have Platini Womela, the co-founder of Africa is Home.
Hello.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Prof, let's begin with democracy in the continent. After the colonizers left, they left us a governance system, which they then defined to us as having limitation of presidential term, as having multiple political parties, and having a periodic election. Now, the question is, do you think Africa should define democracy based on African reality?
Yes, of course. I think every country should define their own version of democracy. I think so long as there's a guarantee that there is regular transition of the leadership, and obviously that can be agreed on in terms of, as you know, there's some countries where presidential terms are 7 years, in some countries 5, and in some countries 4 years. So the mechanics can be worked out, but we cannot have dictatorship, which is what we have in most African countries. And it's not surprising because colonialism was dictatorship by Europeans.
Correct.
So since democracy was not practiced during the colonial era, it was not surprising that most of these leaders that emerged after formal colonialism ended would adopt some of the tendencies that they experienced during the colonial era. When they were resisting colonialism, the Europeans would declare martial law or come up with all these kind of measures to detain them without trial. And they wrote these in the laws, in the books. And many of these countries inherited these laws. And then when they started facing domestic challenge, well, they started using those colonial laws that they inherited. And that is the problem. But to me, the bigger problem is this. Most of the African countries negotiated their independence with the former colonial powers.
Correct.
Now, if you're fighting to replace a system that you disagree with, and you go to the capital cities of the countries who are operating those systems to negotiate what will follow, I don't think whatever follows is going to be in the interest of the people who are coming to negotiate. I think it will be in the interest of the people who invited them to come to their city to negotiate. When the United States, I always use this example, decided to throw out the British Empire, they didn't go to London to negotiate. They fought and they kicked them out. And then France said, well, why don't you guys come and talk in Paris and, end the war and finalize whatever type of relationship is going to follow. And that is very important, I think. We never had that in African countries. We never had the opportunity to have national debates to say what type of governing system do we want. Obviously, we don't want to replace dictatorship with dictatorship. But what kind of system do we want? We had our traditional governments as well. Are we going to have part of that play a role in the new dispensation? Maybe have these systems that work on the local level, at the grassroots level. Maybe let's maintain some elements of that. At the national level, we can discuss what type of system we want to produce that will also guarantee democracy, that there's a regular transition. And we never had that. And that, to me, is the major problem that we are still facing in African countries. We can't have so-called democracy on paper and
implementation, yes,
naturally work just because we have it on paper.
And Platini, I know you want to weigh in, but Prof, are you insinuating that democracy is another tool that's being used to continue the colonization systematically in the continent?
Of course, without a doubt. Because first of all, the people who are most likely to benefit from the paper democracy were the elite. The Europeans had their elite, and we Africans, we had our elite as well. In some cases, the few Africans who were lucky to get some education, some even went to Europe to get education, or the United States. They spoke the language of the elite. So the colonial powers who are leaving, they spoke the same language with the new African elite who are going to be running the show. And that has been a big problem in African countries because the elite spend a lot of their energy fulfilling the needs of the elite. So in Europe, in the United States, we have the elite running the country. And when they speak to countries in African continent, they are communicating and interacting with the elite. So who is going to represent the interest of the masses of the African population? That is not there in the equation. So let me give you a very simple example. When African countries take loans from the World Bank or the IMF, who will benefit from those loans? What
Heads
kinds
of
of
state.
projects? Do ordinary Africans have any say?
No,
Absolutely no.
You see,
we
that's
do
the
not.
problem.
Sometimes,
Because-
yeah, citizens don't even know the country borrowed the money from IMF.
No, but who's going to pay for those loans?
All
The
of us,
citizens.
the citizens pay.
The citizens are the ones who are paying. They're being taxed. They're being urged to produce more. They're being made to sacrifice with less consumption because the government of the elite, by the elite, for the elite, have taken out a loan on their behalf. You see? So we don't have democracy because if the vast majority of the population are not participating in the state, how can you say that's democracy? So let me give you another example. China, compared to most African countries, is a democracy. And obviously, some people will hear me say this and they'll say, oh, what are you talking about? They'll be shocked. Because to them, when they hear democracy, they hear the United States, they hear Britain, France, Germany. That's what they're used to. But if you look at it carefully, China, the citizens participate in the affairs of the nation. They have local government at the grassroots. They have regional governments. They have national governments. China is not the same China under Mao Zedong, who led the Chinese Revolution, and then he governed until his death in the 1970s. Since then, China has had transition. Yes, it might be managed transition because you don't have what in the United States, for example, you have a Democratic Party and a Republican Party. So they contest head to head. And that may have its benefits sometimes, and it may have its problems too. Because when you contest head to head, it's a winner take all. So for example, if the Democrats, once they win, the very same day, the Republicans spend all their energy and resources abusing them and undermining them, trying to make it impossible for them to govern so that things will go downhill and Republicans will have a better chance to win. And the minute Republicans win, the Democrats on the very same day they start abusing the Republicans and doing anything within their power to bring them down so that they can win. In China, it's very different. In China, they have one party, but within that same party, they have a lot of interaction, a lot of competition, a lot of contest. And when it gets to the very top, they want to give that image of stability. So sometimes the competition is done in the back rooms, you know. But a new set of leadership take their turn to manage the affairs of the state. We don't have that in most African countries. The closest you come to, perhaps, is South Africa, where they have, you know, multi-party, of course, and it's so far working because they respect the Constitution in South Africa. And of course, Nelson Mandela was very instrumental in setting the tone.
Yes.
He did a great job.
One term, and he left. He said, okay, you guys manage. And while he was alive, he wanted to make sure there would be a successor while he was still alive, so he could keep his eyes on what was going on. So in South Africa, look what happened to the last few presidents. Jacob Zuma, when he had a vote of no confidence. So they pushed him out. Nobody went and killed him or anything, right?
No.
They followed the Constitution and he was out of the picture. They have a new president. Before him, Thabo Mbeki, before he could finish, you know, his second term, they had a vote of no confidence. They pushed him out. So what South Africa has so far is working to some extent, but they're going to have to make some changes too, because in South Africa, there's also limitations, given its history.
I believe it's 4 years, yeah.
Yes, but it has serious limitations. And let me tell you what the limitation is. In South Africa, even though the European South Africans make up about 8%, so less than 10 of the population, they control more than 70% of the arable land. Think about that, 70%. That is not sustainable.
And that's another conversation, Prof. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you,
But
because
I'm the limitations of democracy.
right.
I gave you a few examples, but in most African countries, we don't have democracy. And that is limiting our ability to benefit from our resources to build up our economies.
Yeah, South Africa, that's a whole
That's a
new
whole
conversation. Platini, I know you wanted to weigh in.
Yeah. Yes, Prof. I guess there's always a saying that no matter how good something is, if it stays for too long, it becomes bad. So we already know that democracy in Africa is just on paper. And we can already see how that is affecting a lot of different systems in Africa.
Right.
Yeah. So, Professor, please, can you enlighten the public on how this is somehow impacting our economy?
Oh, absolutely. Because the elite are not negotiating on our benefit, for our benefit. So they're selling our resources for very cheap. They're giving away our resources. And first of all, think logically. If you're a leader, your country has just come out of colonialism. And colonialism was not so much because Europeans didn't like Africans. No. It was because Europeans wanted the resources of Africa.
Right.
Absolutely.
So if you go back and look at what Kwame Nkrumah said, the first prime minister and later president of Ghana, and he has a book called Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism.
Yep.
And Nkrumah said they wanted our resources during colonial regime. They are still going to want our resources after paper independence.
Yes.
So how can we guarantee that we get a fair price for our resources? He said they will use every measure, including military. So we need to be strong enough. We need to have a United States of Africa and a single military command. And then, then we can talk. You want something from me? Okay, this is the price, and you buy it.
Yeah.
But so long as we remain all these divided countries, a number of things are going to happen.
We can never rise.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. They'll
yeah.
just take the resources, or they will set one African country against the other African country. And they'll also use the World Bank and the IMF to control us. And he knows that because Ghana was one of the first countries to borrow money from the World Bank to build the electric project, the Volta project at Akosombo Dam. And he knows it because at one time, when he was having some issues with the US government, the State Department told the World Bank, even though the money was already approved, delay the disbursement. In other words, slow down the remitting the money to Ghana so that they can feel the pain, so that Ghana's economy can go down, so that the people of Ghana can get angry and Nkrumah, and then the military and police can remove him. And that's exactly what happened in Ghana. Primarily, they didn't want Nkrumah because Nkrumah was talking African unity. And the United States, the Europeans, they knew this was not
1963 Addis
in their
Ababa.
interest.
Yeah.
And let me give you another example of why this is important.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know this. In 1960, the per capita income of China was $89. $89. That's income per head. In Ghana, it was 190. So in other words, in 1960, the per capita income of Ghana was double that of China. But what happened? What is the difference? China took control of its politics. Regardless of what kind of system they had, they were in control of the system. They threw out the European countries that used to come and occupy China. At one time, during the historical era, they even declared war on China because China was not allowing them to ship drugs to China, opium, to keep the Chinese, sedated. Yeah, how dare you, China, refuse for us to give you drugs? They fought China, they occupied China. But after the Chinese Revolution, China unified. So no European country could come and take advantage of China after that. They started using their resources for China's interest. And ironically, now they're also using Africa's resources for China's interest. As a result, today, China's per capita income is still low compared to the United States, but compared to African countries, it's high. It's $11,000. Ghana is about 2,500. So now today, China per capita income is more than 4 times that of Ghana. The GDP is much larger. So the GDP of China is $15 trillion with a T.
Per
The
capita.
United States that's total GDP.
The total GDP of the country.
15 trillion. The United States is 21 trillion.
Trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Africa, all of Africa combined, is 2.6 trillion. Just think
Not
about
2.6. Last time I checked was 1.7. But
Yeah. Now it's 2.
it may have gone down because right now,
yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
economic production collapsed over the last 2 years because of
I mean, COVID has proven
I
that
agree with
we
you.
we
So
do
you're
not
actually right.
have
So my figure is
sustainable.
dated. Your figure is probably much more up to date.
Yes.
But the key thing is this. It gives us hope at the same time. Because why does it give it hope? Because if China was able to do it within the last half a century or so, then Africa, with all its resources, should be able to do it within a 15-year period, provided we have stability, provided we have control of our resources. We can do it. And that's one blessing that we have.
Yeah.
They came and enslaved Africans, they colonized Africa, but they cannot take all the resources that we have in
They
the
stay
ground.
right in Africa. They can't
So,
take our
We still have it.
resources.
yeah,
We,
you
we
great,
still
great,
have it. Now we
great,
have to get our act together. That's what we need.
right, great
Get our protections
examples.
together.
However, Prof, I'll have to disagree on one point. We do not have stability in the continent. Also, about the resources, you talked about how China improved its economy from 1960 to present because of system, right? Systematically. Now, if you look at China, China only used the labor. They don't have that a lot of resources like Africa, right? You look at countries like Dubai.
Absolutely.
In Dubai they discovered oil. Back in 1980s and 90s, Dubai was a desert. Look at Dubai today. You look at countries like Uganda, they discovered gold worth trillions of dollars. We are not surprised in Africa. You look at Congo, you look at in Senegal where they discovered oil. But how come China has developed? How come Dubai has developed and Africa with all these resources, we still the same? So do you think the problem is the system or do you think it's the elite?
Or the people.
It's a combination of both. And by the way, Dubai, I would not want to be a country like Dubai, but perhaps they'll be able to manage it. And the problem with a country like Dubai is oil, as you know, the whole world is now being pushed to transition away from oil. So they're going to have to, face the challenges. They have to invest their resources very well to take care of them in the far future when oil is no longer going to be a product that is marketed around the world. So that's the challenge that countries like Dubai face. Here's the problem. Here's what China has, which we don't have in Africa. They have integrated economic systems. And what do I mean by integrated? It means that they use their resources to create products. And that's how you industrialize, by you manufacturing products, because that promotes skilled labor. You're using those mineral resources to make more complex products. Not very complex, but compared to selling it raw, it's complex. Everything, well, complex, I mean computer, I mean the watch you
Technology.
the technology, the cell phone you have, this headset that I have.
Everything we use, China
Everything is
manufactured.
within, it's integrated. And the resources that they don't have, they take from Africa and they use it to benefit China. That's what you mean by integrated. We don't have that. When we grow coffee, we put the coffee in big bags, we put it on.
We sell them, we don't process them.
Sell it overseas. There's no processing.
Right.
So we get
Same with the Ghana cocoa,
Just send everything out.
teas. Yeah.
tea, you name it, right? And then they tell us, oh, because you didn't process it, we're only going to buy it for peanuts. So they give you, pennies, right? And you take the pennies. Once the tea gets to Germany or the United Kingdom, the people who are taking the bags down, they get paid. The ones who are transporting it to the factory, they get paid. The ones who are separating it, they get paid. The ones putting it in these nice bags, they get paid. The packets. The people who manufacture the packets, they get paid. They wrap it up in plastic, they get paid. Once they're in boxes, they have to be transported somewhere, right? Those people get paid. It comes to the grocery stores. The grocery store owner get paid. The consumer comes there, and by the time he buys it, that same coffee now, the value has gone up by, I don't even know, maybe 50 to 100 times. You see? If all that activity was being done
In Africa,
it means everybody
job
getting paid
creation.
outside Africa
Yeah.
would be getting paid in Africa. And you
Yes,
magnify
that's what we
that
need.
for every range of product.
Yes.
So you see, all these jobs in Europe, in the United States, in Germany, in Japan, these are African jobs that we're exporting. And that is why we have 60% unemployment in South Africa. We have 80% unemployment in Uganda because by not processing our products domestically,
Right.
we're exporting our jobs. And this is just for one product. So let's take copper. The countries that have the bulk of copper, Zambia and Congo, you see? But what do they get for the copper? They get nothing because they sell it raw, ship it raw in these containers, in these ships. And then everybody else who gets paid from this copper is getting paid outside Africa. Even diamonds. Why do we need to take diamonds from an African country to cut them into these beautiful stones? Why do we have to send it to Israel or to London or to New York? You mean we can't train Africans to cut diamonds?
And the uncut one is really cheap.
So, Prof, do you think the problem
The
is
uncut diamond is cheap.
lack of infrastructure or lack of skilled labor?
Lack of control. Lack of control over the products, because infrastructure can be built
Right.
with the resources. Once you get paid for the resources, now you have money to build the infrastructure. Instead, we have it upside down. We go to the World Bank and IMF, we get all the money, we build the roads, the bridges, and then we can't pay for it because we are still shipping our products to create jobs in Europe. You see, it should be the other way around.
Right.
Let's
Right.
use these products in Africa. Now we have the money. Now we can get a loan from anybody, even a commercial bank.
Yeah.
We don't need to go to the World Bank. Because, the big problem is this. When you go to the World Bank and they give you money, this is a condition which they will not budge from. They will not allow you to industrialize.
And that's strategic, and that's strategic because they need our raw material and resources, yes, to live a comfortable life here. Without Africa, you and I wouldn't be talking on Zoom right now.
Absolutely.
Nothing will function, bro.
Yeah, it's strategic.
Without
Yes.
Africa, nothing will function.
IMF are designed to keep us underdeveloped because the biggest shareholders of the World Bank and IMF are the industrialized Western countries. So do you think they will allow the World Bank and IMF to go and create competitors in Africa,
Absolutely not.
to allow Africa to become economic giants so that they can compete
Absolutely
with the
not.
West? Even within the US, if you see companies, right, corporations, do you see a company A going to build a company B so that company B can compete with company A? Of course not. They always try to undermine the other.
Right.
And that is what the World Bank and the IMF does in terms of undermining Africa, unfortunately.
Platini, yeah.
Professor, I have a question for you. So how do you think we can better move forward to restructuring these systems and having the ways out of Africa for good?
It sounds very simple, but it's very true. We need to find a way to unite. And even if we don't unite formally, we have to unite on certain agenda. Sometimes you have to build things slowly. So for example, there are only a handful of countries that have major deposits of copper. So the countries that produce copper must come together and say, I am not going to undersell you. Zambia and Congo, for example, you cannot have different prices when you're negotiating with the West or with China. I don't know the price, but let me just, take a wild, guess. Let's say it's sold in tons, but let me go by pound. Let's say it's $10 per pound, right? Congo can't sell it at $10. Well, Zambia is selling it at $5. Of course, they're going to go to Zambia, you see?
Right.
Now Zambia is undercutting Congo. If they agree that it's 10, then all they have to decide is how much are you going to sell this year, Congo? How much are you going to sell this year, Zambia, to the rest of the world? Are you going to sell 50 tons? And let me sell 40 tons this year. Next year, I'll sell 50 and you sell 40, but they have to be on the same page. They can't be competing.
So the problem with that, though, Prof, I'm sorry, is we don't control the price of our minerals. The price of our minerals are determined in London, they are determined in Washington and Tel Aviv. For the very reason that you said that we sell it raw, we don't process it.
But I think what Prof is trying to say is behind the scenes. Even though on paper it shows that all of this is supposed to be determined out there, we can come together and understand on some certain level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
And
officially.
the reason why the price is determined in the cities you just mentioned is because they know they can go to Zambia and say, I'll give it to you for 5, because Congo is asking me for 7.
For 7.
Why can't I say 7?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
If Congo
Okay.
and Zambia on the same page, then the
They
price
agree,
will be
yeah.
determined by Congo.
There's nothing they can do.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
see.
we allow them
Yeah.
to tell. How can you have a product? You're wearing that shirt, by the way. I like African shirts.
Thank you,
How
sir.
can I come to you and say, I'm going to give you $5 for that? Say why? Because Milton in New York controls the price of your shirt. It doesn't make any sense.
It
at
doesn't
all.
make sense, yeah.
But yet we are allowing them to do that.
And that's exactly what I was trying to say now. Prof, yeah, COVID has proven.
We need to become a little more sophisticated. A lot of it is within our control as human beings. You have to start dealing with each other in a very different way. And it will change. That same kind of approach, our children and their children's children will start adapting it. But for the since African countries started winning independence 60 years ago, we have not been sitting and saying, how can we come together? How can we come together? The countries of OPEC, for example, these countries that sell oil. Do you know one of the individuals who was most instrumental in building OPEC and telling them this is how much we should get for our oil? It was the late Muammar Gaddafi. When he came to power in Libya, he was only 27 years old, but really ahead of his time. He said, we have the oil. Why are the people who needed determining the price? He was one of the earliest advocates of OPEC. They came together. Now, none of them are doing backroom deals. They all agree the price is going to be the same. They only determine that this year you sell this quantity, you sell this quantity, you sell this quantity. Now, suddenly oil went from like $10 a barrel, $100 a barrel, even higher than that. And they built their wealth. And they, bless you, and they never really forgave him for that. They never forgave him for that. And because he nationalized the oil companies. So Libya owned the oil companies that produced the oil and determined how much they were going to invest in A, B, C, infrastructure, education, what have you. Unlike the other countries like Saudi Arabia, all those countries, yes, they made a lot of money and still make a lot of money from oil, but most of the companies that are producing it in those countries are Western companies. Libya said, no, we want to have our own national oil company. That is why Libya was able to have one of the highest per capita incomes on the entire African continent. And the reserves from its oil that it had in savings was more than $100 billion. Money just sitting there in case they needed it for something.
Wow.
But they don't like those kind of things. And that's why they said, oh, they were going to Libya because Gaddafi is killing his own people. How many African countries are the leaders killing their own people? Why don't you go to those countries to stop the leaders from killing their own people? That was not the reason.
Only Libya needed democracy.
They wanted to control the oil. And then they destroyed the country in such a bad way that now even nobody's benefiting from the oil.
Yeah, so now, Prof, we only have a few minutes left. Now, COVID has proven that nobody's safe. right?
Absolutely.
Nobody has a sustainable economy. The global, we need each other, right? Now, if you look at the country, excuse me, I'm under the weather here, such as United States, they are preparing themselves economically in terms of medical equipment, food stock. Now, do you think African heads of states have learned the lesson to prepare for the next pandemic economically?
Nope.
No,
Nope.
no, they've not. They've not. If they were to learn a lesson, it would have been during Ebola,
Yes.
correct?
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ebola happened. Think about it. All these 54 countries, the continent has 1.3 or so billion people.
Mhm.
Who came to the rescue of Africa during Ebola?
Europe and America.
The West.
They leave this out. Tiny Cuba. Cuba sent hundreds of doctors to the countries that were affected. Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, all the countries that were affected by the pandemic. Cuba, with a population today of like 12 million or so, had to go and rescue people on a continent of 1.3 billion. It is organizing government. It's having the national interest, the interest of the people at stake. And we lack that. So we did not learn from Ebola. We are not going to learn from this experience. But what might happen is this. I don't think we've seen the end of the problem from this pandemic and the Ukraine war. And I want to say one thing before we run out of time about that. But this is creating so much stress that a couple of African governments will not survive from the problems arising from the current situation, the inflation, the post-pandemic economic position. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe the governments that come afterwards would take some lesson from this. Now, why I wanted to say one thing related to the Ukraine war. Now we have food shortages in many African countries. We have inflation. We have, in Uganda, you had the dictator was telling people, if you can't afford bread,
Eat cassava.
He said, eat cassava. That is not national policy. National policy is when you have reserves in stock so that when you have a situation like this, you can provide relief to your citizens, some type of intervention. But here's the biggest tragedy. We have all the fertile land that we need. We have people who were farming before many European countries were even created, right? Britain was created in the 10th century. Africa was farming for centuries before that. Africans were farming in the Nile Valley, in ancient Egypt, in ancient kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, Songhai. From the turn of the century with the Christian era, the beginning of the Christian era, they were farming, right? Today, Africa imports $35 billion a year worth of food. Think about that. $35 billion. Do you know how much that could transform
The continent.
Why are we importing that much food when we have all this land?
Infrastructure. We don't have infrastructure to farm on our own. So that's what.
It's just, so the lesson is this. Even if the leadership don't learn anything from this experience, so long as we have this kind of conversation that we're having right now, African citizens will learn, they will lift their consciousness, and they will say, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this kind of government. Out the door, until we start having governments, as I said from the very beginning, that have the interest of African people at heart.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Now, Prof, with the last 10 minutes we have left, we would like you to talk about the things you're working on, whether it be the book or a project.
Your adventures so far.
Sure, excellent. As you know, I've been promoting my book. I've been doing public speaking about the book. The book that I have out came out last year. called Manufacturing Hate, how Africa was demonized in Western media. And what I did is I researched the last 300 years or so of writing about Africa in Western books, Western newspapers, Western magazines. And I showed that by racially stereotyping Africa, it wasn't done just because they hated Africans, you know? It was done to justify economic exploitation. So for example, during slavery, you had to convince, you know, other Europeans that Africans were not fully human beings. That's why we have to treat them like animals. Otherwise, they would be asking questions, right? So that is why they developed this white supremacist policy and ideology. During the colonial era, it was the same thing. Why are you coming and taking over a country that doesn't belong to you and imposing your sort of government and forcing them to produce only things that benefit your economy? Why are you doing that? Oh, because they are not civilized compared to Europeans, you know? And then the newspapers, including the New York Times, after when Africa was fighting for independence, many of the stories were saying, oh, they really don't deserve independence because they're not civilized. So I critiqued that. And also what made my book, I think, a little different from most books, I was able to go to the archives of a major paper like the New York Times, and I discovered the letters that were exchanged by the editors here in New York and the reporters that they sent to Africa. And some of it, you'll be shocked by the racism that they expressed in the letters they exchanged. And that racism was also carried like this into the news stories. So let me just give you one example. I found a letter by a reporter named William Garrison, and he had been sent to cover the civil war in Nigeria, the Biafran War in the 1960s. And then he wrote a story, and then he's reading his article in the New York Times. And he wrote to the editor complaining. He said, who put that in my article? And what did they put in his article? He didn't write it himself. He didn't see it. They wrote about Nigerians dressed in grass leaf skirts. In other words, they wanted the article to convey a tribal image of Nigeria. So since it was missing from the story, they just made it up and they put it in the New York Times. And obviously, it would be very hard to believe that a paper like the New York Times could be that malicious in demonizing Africa if I did not discover the letter in their own records, in their own files. So that's why it's been very challenging to get the so-called mainstream newspapers to review this book, because many of them are afraid of the New York Times, a very powerful newspaper. Many writers want to end up writing for the New York Times. So they think, okay, if I review this book, I put my name on it, I will never be hired by the New York Times. But thank God for independent media, independent radio. It's allowed me to discuss this book. And also the universities are using it, including my own university, John Jay. And of course, it's available from the publisher, which is Kendall Hunt Publishing, Kendall. Hunt is Hunt Publishing Company. And it's also on Amazon now, so people can order it from Amazon. Okay. And the second book I'm now working on, in fact, I finished it. I have an artist working on the final touches on the artwork, because it's going to be a graphic book. Okay. The book is called Empress Taitu and Emperor Menelik in Love and War. This is a story that needs to be widely known. Ethiopia was the only African country not to be colonized. Not that the Europeans didn't try to. They tried, but Ethiopia defeated the invading European country, which was Italy, at the Battle of Adwa. The Italian general had promised, at that time, Italy was a kingdom. He promised King Umberto that when I come back from Ethiopia, I'm going to bring the emperor, Menelik, in a cage so we can put him in the zoo. So he came, his army was commanded by 5 generals, 17,000 soldiers with modern weapons, with artillery. You know, they called it cannon in those days. The battle was on March the 1st, 1896. It lasted 6 hours. The Italian army was completely destroyed. And what was unique about this battle was that the Empress, Taitu, the wife of the emperor, was also on the battlefront. She was commanding 6,000 men under her command. And they annihilated the Italians. They killed almost 3,000 Italian soldiers. That's why many people don't know about this story, that how could so many European soldiers be killed in Africa? They captured about 3,000 as well. One was a general they captured. They killed 2 generals. One general was missing, was never found. And the commander-in-chief, who promised to come back to Italy with Menelik in a cage, he fled the battlefield with his life. That's how he was able to make it back to Italy alive. So this is an important story that Africans on the continent need to know about. Africans in the diaspora need to know about that. But when you hear a story where the Africans turned the table and defeated Europeans, this is a story they don't want to be widely known. That's why I did this book. I did it as a graphic because I want people to also relate to the illustration so they can picture what was going on the battlefield. And then finally, they also did something which was, of course, historic. They captured about 3,000 Italian prisoners, and they marched them back to Addis Ababa, the capital, and they put them to work. So literally now you have Europeans like almost enslaved by Africans supervising, Europeans, put them to work for about a year, and then they made Italy pay a huge sum of money, and then they released them. I think people need to know about this story, and that's why I hope this book will be ready soon.
So very educational book, and you say it will be found on Amazon, correct?
No. The first one is already on Amazon, the one about the demonization of Africa. This one will be available probably by November.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Great books there, Professor Milton.
Ton from New York City. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
joining us,
Prof.
sir.
Thank you so much for joining
both
us.
of you for having me. I hope you bring more people on your show who can talk about the importance of Africa taking control of its resources. Once we control our resource, that's
And
Game
love.
over.
Yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
so much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much.
Prof.
Thank you.